Greetings, my name is JC,
And I'm Ian.
and this is the Gamer's Gaiden. In this episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and we came up with an interesting topic that we thought we would go through: video games that should have had sequels. So
Yeah, we were kind of talking about some games. Actually, it's funny because I'd mentioned, I think, Vanquish.
right,
We were talking about Vanquish and Bayonetta,
and
and I was like, oh man, like Platinum always kind of does these same sort of games, and Vanquish was a little bit different, but sort of kind of the same.
yeah,
And then we were like, man,
and most
there's
of them
like,
don't have sequels.
no,
Yeah.
no, like a lot of them are like kind of one-shot deals, except for Bayonetta. But
Right, that's kind of like the one exception, probably because it did so well. But and I think they kind of planned for a sequel, right? Because it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a cliffhanger at the end, a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of games that get released, like a lot of really good IPs.
Mm-hmm.
That you're like, oh, I would really like to see you guys continue.
Yeah. We're gonna get into two games each on what we felt that never really got a sequel and did. So let's get into it. And Ian, how about you start? There's a game that you constantly name on the show that if people have been paying attention over the last few episodes, they might have a good idea what this might be.
So, Bully. Bully was kind of the big one for me because,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not the only one. I know the internet is sort of alive with this one as well.
Right.
It's one of the big Rockstar titles that people are kind of like clamoring for another.
Yeah, it's really that game that you do constantly see, like, why are you making so many GTAs? And, like, we love it that you made a Red Dead sequel, but, like, Bully was made in the early 2000s, and
Yeah,
we would love a sequel.
It would be amazing to see another game set within. It doesn't even have to be like within the same universe.
Right.
It just needs to be the same format.
Mm-hmm.
Like that kind of middle school, high school kind of thing. And I mean, I know it's kind of it can be a bit of a touchy subject now.
Mm-hmm. But they could do like him in college or something like that.
Oh, totally.
Because was it just the freshman year of Bully, or was it all like 4 years of high school?
It was just the first year.
Right, so they could do his senior years or something like that as well.
Yeah,
and see how things have changed or something. So.
Absolutely. I mean, they can certainly do more like within the same universe.
Yeah.
Or they can do what they've done with most of their other sequels,
Mhm.
and just it's a brand new game. In a similar kind of world,
Mhm.
but
So
it's
why
a brand new story.
Why do you think this game never actually got a sequel? Do you think that it's because the story was kind of too complete, or that they just don't think it sold enough?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Right.
I cannot think because Bully did well.
Mm-hmm.
It had just enough controversy behind it, like most good Rockstar games.
Right. I guess they did. It was popular enough to get the remaster, so that does say something about it.
It was remastered on the last gen consoles,
right,
and on current gen as well.
Yeah.
Like it's got a lot of re-releases.
Mm-hmm.
It just hasn't got a sequel.
Right.
Which, I mean, what's the deal? Come on, Rockstar.
Yeah, come on, Rockstar.
I mean, I know they take a long time to release games. Grand Theft Auto 5 came out
a while ago now.
a long time ago.
Yeah. So much that it kind of feels like 6 should come out. But I don't know, I feel that Rockstar's sort of just concentrated on their games as a service, since they kind of added in the online component.
Oh, absolutely. Because like
And
GTA Online is a huge thing, and they're really pushing the Red Dead Online as well.
Yeah, and the company has made most of its money from microtransactions through GTA Online. It's like the majority stake of their company. So maybe they just feel that it's not a game that would be able to play with that format well enough. I don't really know. But then, like, single player games have always been so successful, regardless of what Microsoft has said and EA has said.
Oh, it's true. And like Rockstar has been so well known for their single player campaigns. Like that's what they did.
Especially, and they're still doing it, just not as often.
Yeah.
You think that
there's these huge gaps in between their releases. Mm-hmm. I would really love to see a Bully 2.
Yeah.
Because we do have some really great, I mean, arguably not as much the later seasons, but like 13 Reasons Why, the early seasons of that were really cool. It touches on a lot of like, I don't know, current subject matter that's relevant for younger people.
But not necessarily current subject matter, just passing the boundaries of sort of what some television shows are willing to talk about, especially
Exactly.
since it's like Netflix. I know HBO does that type of thing too.
True.
But you don't see that type of thing on like cable TV as much. But
No, and Rockstar's the company in games that has always done that.
Yeah,
they've always been
like,
willing to push the boundaries.
They're that type of publisher in the video game world.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And they don't have the fear of telling a story that other people might not necessarily tell.
Yeah, like
so
they've gotten a lot of controversy with everything from soliciting workers to bullying in school to just gun violence, that they just continually persist and tell good stories. And yeah, I agree.
And they pull from really good subject matter, and I think there's still so much that they can pull from, and there's no reason why they couldn't make a follow-up.
Yeah, especially since like even the later years of high school, you're really like concerned about either getting into the workforce or applying to colleges and stuff like that, and there's still a lot of stresses, and to an extent still some bullying as well, that
absolutely
they don't have to. It doesn't have to be like the freshman sort of like hazing, bullying year of the most of it. There is different topics that they could still keep it the same flavor and the same theme, and just be a little bit more aged, like maybe 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. There's a lot that they could do. Anyways, so Bully, I think I really would love to see a sequel for Bully.
Yeah, that one's a really good one.
So JC, what was your first pick for something that should have a sequel?
So my first pick is a game by Squaresoft from the PlayStation days, where they were well known for doing a lot of innovation in the role-playing genre. The game is Vagrant Story, and this is a game that came out sort of in the time that I feel that they kind of adventured more into making new IPs and games that weren't necessarily well-established series and things like that.
Because this was kind of an action RPG?
Yeah, so it was a game that was sort of live in the sense that you could move around in live time just like the enemies, and then whenever you hit the action button, then you would essentially open up a sphere around your character for your radius. Each weapon would have a different reach essentially, and then you would select a body part on whether you wanted to hit like the arm or a leg or the head or the body, for example. And yeah, you could use different types of weapons, and it had a really amazing, unique combat system, especially for the time and in an RPG, because I hadn't really seen anything like this before.
It sounds a little bit like VATS, but sort of like a melee form of it.
Yeah, it's pretty much the exact same thing, just in a turn-based RPG essentially, because like VATS is something used in first-person shooters, and this game just had like that really neat combat system, and on top of that, it had a damage rating system where each of the items had a numerical value to tell you how damaged they were. And there's a lot of games that do that now, but this was sort of like, it was at least the first game that I had played that had this system.
Yeah, because I really don't remember a lot of RPGs back in like the like late 90s, early 2000s with weapon degradation.
Yeah, and it was neat because like eventually you would essentially have to repair your items and stuff like that, so you would continually do a good amount of damage, because you not only had the quality of your weapon, you also had the essentially life of your weapon, like how much damage it had onto it, and also the damage types, like certain weapons were better against armored figures and certain were better against beasts, for example. And you fought beasts and people in the game. So
now, was there also like magic and stuff like that in there? I mean, I will say I think I played about 20 minutes of Vagrant Story.
Yeah, and there is some spells that you can cast in the game too.
Okay.
It's a solo adventure where you're just the main character Ashley, and you don't really get a party, so it's just you, which is a big difference too. But there are some characters that are friendly that come in and out of the story, and then some characters that are reoccurring, like villains, for example. And on top of all that, this game, to this day, in my opinion, still has one of the best introductions to a role-playing game ever. it sets the tone of the game so well, and the sort of archetypes of each of the characters to a T, that you really know what to expect as it throws you into the first sort of levels of like the catacombs of the city. Essentially, is where you start, and you're just kind of like on your way, and you know that this is going to be like a really cool, like dark medieval fantasy game, because that's sort of its setting. And I know that reading some of the developer notes, that they say that the game is part of the Ivlance world, which is, if you don't know what that is, the Final Fantasy Tactics world. But if you've played Tactics and you've played Vagrant Story, the city isn't located kind of like on the map. And they kind of just admitted that, or agreed that it had the same flavor, so they were like, well, it's an Ivlance sort of thing, it's in a different area. So it does kind of take place in the same world per se, but like even the character classes and stuff like that, they don't really exist. You're just a character, which is kind of cool, and the equipment that you equipped is sort of like what makes that character. So it was really, I think, ahead of its time, to be honest with you, in some respects. Everything from its soundtrack to its graphics were really well done for the time. We're talking PlayStation 1 here, so like the polygonal graphics are not necessarily the greatest, but they're a little bit better than Final Fantasy VIII, which was the one of the better looking games on the PlayStation for like character models and stuff that. And it sort of looked like a painting with its art style, because it had a very like drawn aesthetic to it, sort of like Tactics, where except for it was 3D. So, and you could like shift the map like left and right and stuff like that. And there's some really cool villains and bosses in this game as well, like dragons and suits of armor that are sort of like attached together by magic that are trying to stop you and stuff like that. And you go through like catacombs and sort of like a forested area and the castle and like different buildings and stuff like that. And it was a great game. If you've never played some of the early Squaresoft games, and by that I don't mean like the Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, I mean like PlayStation games. This is really where the company was on the top of their game, making a lot of unique IPs that never really got sequels, and this unfortunately is one of those games that never really got a sequel. And I think that it really deserves one. And I don't know if it really needs a direct sequel, but something that takes place like a prequel, or sort of maybe through the perspective of a different character, or a sequel like just in like the same like aesthetic and world, especially with the mechanics and stuff like that, I think would be really fantastic.
Yeah, we've had other games set within Ivlis, because the like you said, the tactic games are there.
It sort of
12
put it
was
on the map
in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think parts of 14, from what I understand, you can go to certain parts of it. But,
okay, that's really neat. Yeah, it's a great world setting, and it does have really cool aesthetic to it for sure, because it is different than like normal Final Fantasy's fantasy and sort of urban fantasy settings.
Yeah,
it does stand on its own.
But you don't really see a lot of things, because what I do remember from what I played about this is that a lot of the sections that you were in had they had verticality to them.
Yeah,
like you were moving up and down. There's a lot of boxes and stuff.
As well.
Yeah. And I remember the movement. I sort of remember the combat, but not too much. But I mean, that's a really interesting system. And you don't see a lot of things in more of an action-based game,
right,
where you can move around in real time and then stop it and have that without getting into a first-person shooter.
Yeah.
I mean, your early Fallouts, you had the VAT system within the turn-based game, but it
was handled in a much different way.
Exactly. You don't have these melee focused games where you're playing as one character. Yeah, that's interesting. I would be more apt to play a remaster or a sequel. I mean, I have tried to play the original, I mean, maybe I can give it another shot now that I've had a
It
glowing recommendation
certainly-
from JC.
It
but
certainly wasn't a role-playing game that, in my opinion, a lot of people couldn't necessarily get into it because it was a little bit more, I almost want to say like hardcore, but not really. Like it had very specific types of mechanics that you kind of had to get into in order to be progress in the game.
yeah,
That if it wasn't really driving with you, you probably wouldn't have liked the game. But it does have all those other things going for it that I think definitely more people should at least give it a chance.
I mean, I think my issue was that I was playing it on the PSP Go.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't have access to all of the buttons that I necessarily needed access to.
That's fair.
So that was a huge downside to the system.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm sure maybe if I had a chance to revisit it, say on like maybe the Switch,
Yeah, maybe.
I probably give it a better chance.
Cool.
But no, I mean that's really cool. Vagrant Story.
So
Should have been another one. Vagrant Story 2.
what's your second game, Ian?
So for me, this was a little bit difficult. I actually we were talking about this, and we had our usual spreadsheet, and I put down like a bunch of different ones, and JC's like, you get two. Okay. So I'm gonna talk about Jade Empire. Yeah, if you've watched this, you've probably heard me talk about Jade Empire before. You've also heard me not talk a ton about BioWare.
Mm-hmm.
Because
It's generally me.
yeah, it's usually you, because like Mass Effect was a huge hit for you, whereas it fell a little bit flat for me. I mean, I like the second one, which I know it's not as good as the first one, and I can even see that. I can see that it's very different. None of the Dragon Age games grabbed me.
Right.
I even tried. I played through the Origins. I played through all of the intros for all of the different classes, and as soon as I got to the part where they're like, "Well, you're gonna go with the Grey Wardens," I was like,
Nah.
"Let me start over again. Let me see what the other intro looks like." Nah. I tried getting into Dragon Age 2. Still not. I think I played like 5 hours of that and just like,
But Jade Empire is a game that actually
Jade Empire hit so hard. This was so good. I will say that yes, I loved the Knights of the Old Republic games. I love those.
And they're both
KOTOR was the reason why I bought an Xbox.
Yeah. And they're both the same game engine, the
Yeah.
Aurora engine, so
It looks the same. The combat is very much the same. Just drastically different stories.
yes.
But I mean,
and that's cool.
Sort of.
'Cause there's not a lot of video games or role playing games that are like Asian themed, right? Like there's, I guess I'm gonna probably pronounce this wrong, but Suikoden or Suikoden, Suikoden.
I probably said it wrong too. There's a lot of ways.
Yeah.
How do you say it?
It is like based off of a Chinese folklore story, but the like a lot of them they're mainly European fantasy.
A lot of them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're like current Japanese.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of like you see very little set in like feudal China, which is such a cool setting.
It is, and like maybe it's just because it's kind of unique to us, because we just don't get that many of them in this genre. But it was really cool because it set the tone right away, and it kind of felt like sort of watching a hybrid of like an old Kung Fu movie or like Kung Fu the show.
It's true, but I mean at the time we also had like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was really big. Hero had come out around the same time, so there's a lot of these big like Chinese martial arts epics that were getting released theatrically over here. And so it kind of makes sense that we would see a video game similar. And I mean, we did have some other games that were also kind of based on the same thing, because I think there was like Iron Phoenix, which was a first-person martial arts game.
Yeah, we certainly get our like Asian themed like ninja games and like Kung Fu games as well. But this was
an RPG. Man, and a party-based RPG. Like this is this is like a classic RPG. And this is classic BioWare, where you have multiple different endings. different storylines. You've got lots of different like quests and side quests with various different options on how you complete them.
Yeah, filled with all sorts of goodies. And even the beginning, like I grabbed footage for it, and for one of our previous episodes where we did
I've talked about this before.
And like the beginning, you choose what weapon you want, and like that kind of has an impact on sort of like your fighting style and stuff like that too, of whether or not you pick like one of the two weapons. So yeah, it was really interesting.
And I remember the tattoos as well. The tattoos have an impact on your like fighting style.
Right.
There was so much behind this that was so cool. You had like a ton of different romance options.
Yep, like you do in BioWare games.
I mean, yes, but this was very much like true to form for them.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like I could be completely wrong, but I don't think you had as many romance options in the Knights of the Old Republic games.
Yeah,
I think you were a little bit more limited. Whereas in this, you had everybody was.
I remember looking them up, and there's about as many as the first Mass Effect game. So
yeah. Like there's a lot. Yeah, it is a really good game, and it's really disappointing because with everything that's happened with BioWare over the last few years, I don't think we have a chance of seeing another Jade Empire game.
Yeah, it's super unfortunate because BioWare is generally a company that you usually get multiple like iterations of a series from them. Like we got like Neverwinter Nights and a bunch of expansions from them.
And there was Neverwinter Nights 2.
But that was done by Atari, but there was still at least somebody else who
but there was like Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2.
That is true.
Yeah.
And those were partially Black Isle as well.
Listen.
But yeah, like we got the multiple KOTOR games, multiple Mass Effect games, multiple Dragon Age games.
We've had 4 Mass Effect games, and we're going to have 4 Dragon Age games.
And to be honest, I think one of the reasons why we may never have gotten a Jade Empire sequel is mainly because of Mass Effect, because it was so successful, and the fact that like it's sort of even pushed out how the frequency of the Dragon Age games, in my opinion, because we just got like almost back to back like Mass Effect games, and then sort of loosely laced like Dragon Age games, and those just became their 2 head IPs that they just fully concentrated on them. And we've never really gotten a remaster from any of their games. The only way that
we should do Anthem, and never do another video game again.
The only remaster, which I wanted to say, that we've gotten from a like game that BioWare has been affiliated with is sort of done by another company. Like Beamdog took the Baldur's Gate and Infinity Engine games, and Neverwinter Nights as well, made the enhanced editions, which like BioWare was related by either the game engine and doing some of the development, or like they made the game like Neverwinter Nights, them and Atari, right?
That's true. And like I mean, the Knights of the Old Republic games and this are available on PC.
Yeah.
But they're just the regular versions. They haven't.
Yeah. One cool thing, though, is the PC versions, which you can still get on both Steam and GOG. There is fans out there for these games, thankfully, a lot of them. And there's communities that have made extra, like, reskins of the games. Like you can get a reskin pack for the Mass Effect games so that they all look the same and stuff like that. And there's one out there for
not only is there fans, there's talented fans who've spent the time to actually like make these better and a little bit more accessible. Because I know that is that is a stopping point for a lot of people, is when you get into these things and they do look a little bit rough in comparison to what we have now.
Right.
It can be a bit of a speed bump for people. But honestly, like I when you grabbed the footage for this, I was honestly kind of surprised at how good it looked.
I was too, and it actually had the resolution for my computer, and this game came out whenever 4:3 resolution was the most common resolution, but it actually had resolutions for the 1080p monitors, and I'm pretty sure I saw higher resolutions as well, so which is really interesting, because it is just like scaled screen of what you see in interface, so it was programmed in such a way that it can, for what it is, it can still look good first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the story's great. That's the most important part.
But you wanted to mention
I did want to mention one more, as long as you let me.
Yeah.
Of course you will. The World Ends With You. It was a Square Enix game.
Yeah, I believe this was for the DS, right? You talked about this once before, I think.
Yeah, this came out on the DS. It was... It incorporated using both screens.
Okay.
Which, I mean, we're going to have a hard time duplicating.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have anything anymore that has that capability.
Even if it only wanted to do the touch screen, like the Switch has the touchscreen capabilities, but then you're telling people that you can't play it docked, and the whole gimmick with the Switch is that you're supposed to be able to play any of the games docked or handheld, and I don't think that'll fly really if you try and tell people you can only play it in handheld mode.
It's true. I mean, I know that we've got the Switch Lite, so there are some things that can only be played in docked mode. So I mean, maybe they might put this out and say, hey, you can only play it in handheld mode.
Right.
We'll see. But even still, part of it was like interacting with the screen. You were purchasing these like 1.5-inch pins, like buttons that you would put on your clothing, because they were super popular at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, still kind of are, but you would buy them.
I guess for diehard fans.
I guess so. You'd buy them, and then they would have different abilities and different attacks, and you would actually have to like learn the pattern and what it was that they did and how you'd be able to use them to like take out these enemies. And what was kind of cool was that you would be moving around on the top screen, like running your character away from the enemies to not like contact them. And then you'd be using the pins on the bottom to perform whatever action it was to do the damage to them. Like you were casting your spells and whatever.
Yeah.
It was really cool. And there was like this game, it was super slick. It'd be really nice to see them do something that different again.
Yeah.
And I think we're essentially having the same discussion with Vagrant Story.
It's really a Square issue.
It really is.
Like they originally did it on the consoles, and they were really unique there. And then later on, they had a lot of experimentation on the handhelds. And then I guess like hopefully they continue to do that, but sometimes there's certain times in history where like Square, and I guess now Square Enix, has sort of experimented a little bit, but like do something with the experimentation, like make a couple of sequels with them, man.
That's true. And we're kind of, I mean, at this point we're out of a period of time where your AAA developers are willing to take risks.
Yeah, which is really unfortunate, because a lot of my favorite games are games that just kind of had a silent release. Like they were really great games that I like going back to, and they're not your Call of Duties and your Final Fantasies, you know what I mean? They're these games that we're talking about now, or some others that we may go into the future. So
it's kind of funny because it sort of I had put down a bunch of games, but War of the Monsters was one of them, and that was sort of I was like, oh, JC, like haven't you ever played War of the Monsters? And he's like, no, and pulls it up, and he's like, oh, it's just the sequel to Rampage.
Yeah,
I'm like, it is not the sequel to Rampage.
I did recognize the game once I saw screenshots of it, because I remember hearing about it, but it's a spiritual successor to Rampage.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're probably going to start seeing a little bit more, is we're going to see these independent developers making these spiritual successors to these things. I mean, we're already seeing it. Like you've got like Stardew Valley, which is a spiritual successor to Harvest Moon.
Yeah.
And I mean, Stardew Valley was amazing. I know we have different opinions on it.
No, I like Stardew Valley. It's a really great game. I like the charm of Harvest Moon a little bit more.
Yeah.
The mechanics in Stardew Valley are definitely more fleshed out, but Yeah, there's pros and cons of each. So
exactly, and I think that's kind of what we're going to see, because the independent developers are the ones who are willing to take those risks because they got nothing to lose.
That is true.
I mean, they're already
they have everything to lose and nothing to lose.
Well, exactly, right? They don't. It's not like they have a reputation that they're going to tarnish.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have no reputation. There's no expectations for what these people are going to make.
Right.
JC.
Yes, Ian.
I've droned on a whole bunch about things that I think deserve sequels. I've also droned on about why we haven't got those sequels. And you know what? I've just talked a lot, JC. What is another game that you think should have a sequel that didn't?
So this is a game by Sony that made it a role-playing game, and if you know what the game is, you would know by now, because this is like the only RPG that they've ever made.
Spider-Man 2?
Well, that was Insomniac or something?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so, no, Legend of Dragoon.
Oh!
Yeah, so in the late PlayStation life, they basically decided, in a world where Square basically did almost all of the big RPGs for the console, and there's so many extra that were released in this era on the PlayStation. Like, PlayStation was kind of known for publishing action-adventure games and racing games, and out of nowhere, they kind of produced a role-playing game, which this game was really, really great.
I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I kind of just thought this was another Square game.
Yeah, it felt like it too, because in Tactics there's a Dragoon class, and I remember my one friend in high school actually thinking that it might be as well, based off of the Dragoon class.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's sort of like related to that or something like that, but it has nothing to do with the Lancers that jump really high into the air and
no, I was
pounce on
wrong.
your,
I was just a dumb kid.
Enemies. It's basically these Dragoon warriors that have dragon essence souls linked to them, and each character has their own, where they have two different forms in battle, and the one is their normal, like, class form. There's each character is a different class, basically. It's preset. And then they have their Dragoon form, which kind of parallels their class. Like the healer has healing style dragon, for example.
Healing breath.
Yeah. And it was just really cool, because the game kind of did the same thing that The Legend of Legaia did, which did get a sequel, thankfully, on the PlayStation 2. But the game is your stereotypical left versus right role-playing game mechanics and turn-based, but during the actual attack, you remember in Super Mario RPG, the 8, that you could press like the action button at the right time and it would do extra damage.
I remember in Final Fantasy VIII, I could pull the trigger
when
I was attacking and I would do damage. I didn't play no Mario RPG.
Okay.
I was too busy playing Final Fantasy VIII. But I mean, that's fine. Make a reference that people would understand, because nobody played Final Fantasy VIII.
No, a lot of people did. So it had that sort of mechanic where it had this square in the middle that was kind of a outline, and then this larger one that kind of like shrunk to that outline square. And if you press the action button at the right time,
so it's kind of rhythm based,
sort of,
a little bit, because you're trying to like hit it at the right.
Mm-hmm.
That's
like,
really cool.
The first one you got was double slash, and there was only like a secondary attack that you could do. But there were some of them that had a lot of combos in them, and they all had their own kind of rhythm to them. For example, the Lancer had like the Gust of Wind dance, and you had a fury of blows, basically, which you like poked and then like swung around and then slashed and then did like poke, 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 poke. But you had to like hit every single hit, basically. And then some of them, they were like really away from the outline, and some of them were a lot closer just because of the timing and stuff like that. And every character had sort of their own setup for them. And I just thought that combat system was so neat, because it used one that I really liked, which was that left versus right turn-based in an active time bar system. Like if you waited too long, a monster would attack you.
Now could you have it as like a wait kind of option, like you could in some of the Final Fantasy games?
I don't think so. I don't really remember. It's been years since I played this. This is kind of going on memory here, but yeah.
That's fair. I mean, it's a small detail, but that's one of the things that I love about about that kind of style. Like
Mhm.
I've been playing a lot of Pokemon lately,
Right.
and what's great is you can just like, it's like, oh, I gotta pee. I can literally throw my console
Yeah.
on the couch and just walk away,
And to
and
be
then come back
fair,
and get back into it. Like,
that's one of the reasons why I like the games where I can hit spacebar and pause, or I can just like have it pause in between the turns and stuff like that because of stuff like that. Or I
but
just like to
it's
sit down and think about it. It just it adds a different dynamic of strategy that you don't necessarily get in a grid-based tactical game, which is totally different, or a completely live action RPG, for example.
Yeah.
All of them play differently. They
but
have
what's
their
kind of
pros and
cool,
cons.
like what's kind of cool about that concept is that even though you have that ability to be like, okay, I'm just going to think about what I'm going to do,
Mhm.
when you finally decide what you want to do,
Yeah.
you actually have to be present. Like you have to
Yeah.
be paying attention.
Kind
You
of thinking
actually
of
have
that.
to do something.
I think it might pause in between character actions, but I don't remember. But yeah, um the combat was really neat, and you could basically morph kind of like a limit breaker over to the dragoon characters, and then you would basically like summon the power of the dragons to help you, which
That's
is
kinda
really
cool.
cool, and it had a really neat lore and aesthetic to it, where there was like one of the main characters, Rose. She was kind of like the only dragoon warrior at the very beginning, and she sensed that Dart was one of the dragoon warriors, so she kind of followed him around at the very beginning of the game. And she knows a lot about the history of the former dragoon warriors and stuff like that, because she was one of them, and it was just a really interesting story that was so different than anything else that I've sort of seen. There was also Meru in the game, which is kind of like the anime girl in the game, but she was part of this sub race that was like these ancients and stuff like that, and they had their own backstory and lore to them, and they had like different factions in the game, and each area of the world basically had the kind of its own aesthetic. Like there was the desert area and like the forested area and so on. And
Forested area was where you started, right?
Yeah, the forested area is sort of where you start.
That's all I remember of this game.
But every area kind of felt alive in its own way, which was just so cool. And we never got anything from the game. And I kind of like the last game that I spoke about, Vagrant Story, where I'm like, I'm not really certain that this game really would need a sequel or a direct sequel. A direct sequel or a prequel is what I meant to say. But because the game really fully encapsulates the story like inclusively, there's not very many loose ends, but maybe something that was like in the past, like a prequel with Rose's original party and like what happened to them, although the end result of what happens may be known if you've played the first game, kind of like the Red Dead Redemption kind of like Red Dead Redemption 2.
Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
Even
and,
Red Dead Redemption.
like you know what's gonna happen, but it's the how, right? And kind of like playing through as Rose in the original party of Dragoons, or something that happens 500 years in the future or something like that, where there hasn't been any like notice of the Dragoon warriors, and maybe the spirit of some of these characters are still around or something like that, or they're journals or something, anything, and then more people find like they need the powers of the dragons again, and they become dragoons.
It surprises me when people put that much time and effort into world building and creating all this like backstory and lore, and then we're like, okay, here's the game. Okay, we're never gonna go back there again.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, and there's a lot of examples of games that this has happened, and in some instances they do that, but then they make sequels like Final Fantasy where they're totally different, and they're different worlds. They have the same mechanics really, but the story is completely different. And sometimes we get franchises that spawn that are direct sequels and prequels and stuff like that, or at least the same world, like the world of Ivlance, which we talked about this episode, where everything isn't 100% connected, but you know it's the same world because Tactics Advance plays very much like the original Tactics, and it takes place in the same world, and you have the same classes and combat and stuff like that.
But 12 plays drastically different from both of those.
Yeah.
And that's still set within the same. It's still set within the same world.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even I hate to keep going back to the Final Fantasy games, but they always have common threads that tie them all together.
Right.
They're drastically different stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, kind of. They're
all save the world, but
yes.
the main elements of the stories are different. But
yeah.
all these games that we've gone over,
things that weave them together.
Yeah.
You could easily just, pull in common elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all these games that we've gone over in this episode don't necessarily have that. Like, there isn't really, like, Bully is similar to some other types of games, and Vagrant's story is kind of similar to some games, and so is Jade Empire and Legendary Dragoon. But they are unique in their own right, and they just never have gotten their justice, really.
It's true.
Being able to get either a prequel, a direct sequel, or just at least something in like truly the same like world or something. It just is kind of unfortunate, and that's why we put these games on our list.
Yeah, I mean, it would be just great to see something come out that ties these together.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said at the beginning, we were having that conversation about Platinum, where it was like, oh, like Vanquish was so cool. It had this like really weird system that they don't really use anymore, and it was great. And I was like, oh man, we should talk about things that
mm-hmm.
that are like that. But there are so many examples out there of things that just people put the time and effort into. They turned out great.
Mm-hmm.
They stand up. They have a huge fan base, and then they're just like, cool, we're never going back there again.
Yeah, and to be fair, on both sides of the sword, there is something to be said about experimenting more and not necessarily doing this, but these are some of those cases where they really should have done more with them.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. Like if you experiment and you hit onto something that's gold,
mm-hmm.
then yeah, I mean, how many times have we seen Call of Duty that keeps
enough?
It keeps reusing the same mechanics.
Yeah.
And then maybe it'll innovate every
add
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But you have the same constant.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get enough of that innovation.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, that's some of our things that we think deserve sequels.
Yeah, our thoughts on the subject anyway.
What about you guys? Is there anything that's come out that you think needs a sequel?
Mm-hmm.
Let us know down
one.
That has never gotten one.
Yeah.
Let us know down in the comments below.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thank you. Appreciate it. If you want to help us out, hit the thumbs up button, and if you're not a subscriber, be sure to subscribe to get more content like this. We record a podcast that's released every Wednesday, and we release episodes every Monday and Friday as well. So stay tuned for those, and we'll see you in the next episode.